Hello everyone and welcome to this evening's CPD webinar. Today we're going to be looking at Norway actually, just as a geographical case study, and I really want to throw in sort of like a critical thinking approach to looking at Norway as a geographical case study and give you some ideas as to how you can implement and integrate Norway into your lessons and the value of this. So the aims of this session, we're going to look at the importance of case studies, but also the importance of critical thinking in the classroom. We're going to look at how case studies can be effectively implemented and integrated within your lessons. We're also going to look at the importance of the choice of your case study, and also looking at the value of Norway with a focus on sustainability, and then give you some critical thinking opportunities and classroom ideas. Just to give you a little bit of background to me, I work for Discover the World Education and also Critical Thinkers. As you know, Discover the World Education, we offer school trips, but more importantly, we offer quite valued CPD and teacher support, so that you can use different sort of like aspects of this, the toolkit and examples within the classroom. Critical Thinkers is a new social enterprise that we have recently set up, and we are in partnership with Discover the World Education. And Critical Thinkers provides an awards scheme as well as support and training for teachers, particularly focusing on children becoming more emotionally intelligent, more resilient, and in turn critical thinkers. So you know, that's a fantastic new enterprise that we're looking into, and is a great partnership with Discover the World. I'm going to turn off my video now, just so that you can see everything sort of like more effectively. Okay, so let's get started then. So Margaret Roberts, an amazing geography lecturer, somebody that I had the pleasure to work with over many years actually. One when I was training to be a geography teacher, but also reading her articles and seeing her lecture at the GA and just reading stuff about. She says if students are to learn to think like geographers, then they need to be able to critically and systematically sort of like think about geographical knowledge and evidence. And she's absolutely right. You know, they need to look at stuff and be reflective of stuff. They also need to put it into locational context as well. And this is the reason why we use case studies in the classroom, so that we can actually justify what we are teaching, and then the students can use them to justify what their knowledge and understanding is showing. Now, the GA, they say that there are 3 key ingredients for critical thinking: becoming better at thinking, making better sense of information, and becoming a more open thinker. And critical thinking is not organised, you know, it's organised, it's not random, sorry. And therefore, ideally, it builds up to all these 3 dimensions. You know, we want it to link with the inquiry process and the achievement, and we want them to have higher order thinking. And this starts right from sort of like the beginning of school, so right from Key Stage 1, going right the way through to Key Stage 5. You know, we want the pupils to develop the ability to ask good questions and reflect on their learning. We want them to examine the evidence. We want them to distinguish fact from opinion and actually really consider those alternative solutions. And we want them to really discuss, debate, evaluate, consider their own perspectives as well as others, and develop their own opinion based on evidence. So, you know, we really want them to do that, and we want to give them the opportunities to do that as well. You know, finally, a key characteristic of critical thinking is that being organised, being systematic. This really helps teachers and pupils, and the attention to all of these areas across the curriculum can really, really help. I'll look at this a little bit further in the webinar actually. So, you know, so once we've had a look at the case study, we'll have a look at some of those critical thinking skills that we can develop by using the case study. In addition to all of that, we actually want them to really think about the world around them, to gain a connection, a sense of place. And to understand connections, there has to be a deeper understanding of what they're learning. Evidence that by learning about a country before focusing on the case study actually gives the students a sense of place, a connection, and it has to be relevant, real, and they have to have a sensory appreciation of the place or topic. Giving students a connection with a place generates this feeling. And it's not your feeling. We want them to have their own set of emotions and connections to a place. You give them the opportunity to do that. And then this gives them that connection. So we don't want to regurgitate our feelings about a place. We actually want them to generate their own feelings. And this is something that I've been really learning about recently. I'm studying adolescent psychology and the adolescent's brain development. And this is something that is so important about generating this emotion, an emotion that is generated from within them, because that will then trigger sort of like the connection. I mean, Ofsted, they picked up on this 10 years ago, and we know that the trends are slowly changing, and but there's still quite a lot of work to do and very little time, isn't there, within our curriculums to do it. And I know much has been spoken within the geography community over the last couple of years about increased understanding, memory and knowledge of a case study, and that is increased if they have information about the country as a whole, which can be put into the case study within a locational context. And it's clear from recent examiners and teacher assessment reports that those students achieving the highest grades have a stronger connection to the case study. They have more of an understanding and recall the knowledge better. But how can we do this without visiting every country that they are studying? It would be great, wouldn't it, to take the students on this amazing field trip where they go and see all these different countries that they're studying. But we know that that is completely impossible. So here are a couple of tips that I think have worked really, really well in terms of generating that connection. The first one is imagery. And I know we all use images in our classroom, but do we know the reason why? And then the second one is a new concept and something that I've used in the classroom a lot, and it's called TED. And I'll explain TED, my little octopus, in a little bit. So first of all, imagery. How often have we said a picture paints 1,000 words? And using imagery will trigger a sense of place. It generates an emotion, which generates the connection, and it's a thought process. Now, Dave Rogers, good friend of mine, great colleague, fantastic geography teacher, he talks about sort of like the power of imagery in his 100 Great Ideas for Geography Lessons. If you don't have this book, please buy it. It's great. It's something like £4 off of Amazon, and it has 100 great ideas for geography lessons. And he talks about the power of imagery and also how to stop PowerPoint being pointless. He talks about how images are powerful. They're highly individualized because they generate a different set of emotions with different people. So therefore they are incredibly personal. Now, Dr. Tim Elmore, he also does a lot of research into growing leaders ready for real life. And in 2019, he talks about imagery, and he has found out that 65% of the population are visual learners, and images improve our learning by over 400%. Our minds are able to process images 60,000 times faster than text. Most importantly, it really generates this feeling, this connection, a sensory appreciation. We know the growth of Instagram, Snapchat, and Twitter, you know, they're all image-based social media platforms. So, you know, they've really tagged into this idea of using imagery, maybe without knowing the reason why imagery is so very important. If we look at TED, TED actually stands for Think, Explore, Discover. And this is a concept that I introduced into the classroom with Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2, Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4 a few years back now. And it works brilliantly. What you have to do is you actually have to give the students a topic to explore. So it's a bit like the old inquiry-based learning. And by bringing it into sort of like some sort of structure, it's not just inquiry-based learning. They have to think about the topic. They then explore the topic within that topic that they are interested in. And it's amazing what they will discover. On this particular image, you can see this is looking at Norway. And I want you to imagine your students are a bit like an octopus on a zip wire. They're on their learning journey. It's fun, it's exciting. You've got a little safety harness on them so that they can zoom along, having fun in their learning, reaching out with all their arms and gathering information and experiences along the way. Yes, sometimes they reach out a bit too far. They might fall off of that zip wire, but you are the harness. You keep them safe and you put them back on that learning journey. So this TED projects are great to instill a sense of place. So for example, you could give a TED project, you could say, okay, we're going to do a case study in Norway. So they go away and they Google, for example, or other platforms are available, they Google Norway. It's amazing what they will find. I Googled Norway and this is what came up. You know, we looked at Vikings, we looked at food, you know, the heart-shaped waffles that you can get in the cities in Norway, you know, the longest road tunnel in the world, the waterfalls, the northern lights, the trolls, the fjords, the Winter Olympics, and Scream. I didn't even know that the Scream artist was actually Norwegian, but you can see from the mix of information here that is available to students to reach out and get. So once they have then discovered what interests them, you then ask them a series of questions that they can then look at in their research. So for example, they may need to include something about the physical geography of the country. They might need to include something about the human side of the country. And all of these images can spark that interest. And all of a sudden, that child, that student has got a connection with Norway. Some of the questions that they might, you know, you might want to sort of like give to them, you know, where did I get this information from? Is it true? You know, is it fact? Is it fake? What have I discovered? How do I want to present this information? How do I know which resources are the most valuable, which are the most useful? And by giving them that independence, you are generating them sort of like more resilience, and you're getting them to critically think about what they are doing. It is an incredible butterfly effect, hence why my butterfly is here, sort of like below my little octopus, because it is amazing what they can do. The true independence nature of these projects really, really start to develop their resilience. They have a choice as to how, you know, what they want to do. How fantastic is that? They should challenge the information they found. They should evidence it. They should make decisions. It's a really, really good skill that you can introduce into a classroom. Okay, so if we're looking at the choice of case studies, it's so hard, isn't it? It really is. There are so many that you can choose from. But in my experience, sometimes the best ones are within places where several case studies can be linked. So for example, if you were to choose, I mean, we are going to look at Norway, but within Norway, you can look at sustainability, you can look at renewable energy, you can look at waterfalls, you can look at glaciation, you can look at climate change. And by doing that, a more of a topic-based sort of, you know, collection of case studies, then actually they will have more knowledge and more depth and more connections to that country. So my best bit of advice is to spend times on discovering which ones you want to use and which ones you feel are best for your students, but also that you are happy and comfortable teaching, because your passion and enthusiasm for that country will come through in your teaching. So make sure you enjoy teaching them as well. It's really, really important. As Chris Gardner says here, the world is your oyster. It's up to you to find the pearls. How many times have our students said, oh my God, what's the point of learning 100 case studies for only 2 or 3 of them to come up? And it's true, it really is true. But by doing it as sort of like having one country where you can do a number of different case studies, they don't feel as if they're learning lots and lots of different case studies because the connections are there. And so it is a little bit easier for them to learn. So let's look at Norway and see what it can offer your students in terms of case study knowledge, information examples, independent learning, and critical thinking. The curriculum, you can see where the links are here, and it goes alongside lots of different specs. So obviously we've got glacial processes and landforms, which I know we look at the UK in Key Stage 4, but obviously when you get to Key Stage 5, you can go a little bit more global. Weather processes and hazards, the climate change in Norway is quite significant at the moment, and obviously you can link that to your glacial processes and landforms. There are many coastal and geological landforms, the water and river processes, economic change. They are heavily reliant on the oil industry, bearing in mind they're the most sustainable country in the world. How long is that going to last? We don't know. So taking a look at sort of like the economy, water resources, where do they get their fresh water from? With climate change, with the retreat of the glaciers, their water supply is actually at risk. Looking at food, looking at energy, they are 99.9% reliable on sort of like the renewable energy. And that's really important. But that renewable energy is very much dependent on the glaciers and on the climate that they have. And then obviously the many different ecosystems. So there is quite a lot of sort of like curriculum links that we can have. Norway really is a gem of a country to study. I think it can provide your students with something a little bit different to the norm, a little bit of that X factor. I know when I was marking exams, it was always lovely to read a paper that had something a little bit different, something that stood out a bit, something that went a little bit off-piste and showed real geographical understanding and knowledge, and not just the ones that we find on the textbook or on Teach It or Schoolology or stuff like that. Something that is a little bit different. And new. That's really great, isn't it, to find something new? So a little bit of background for you. Norway has a total area of 385,000 square kilometres-ish, a population of around about 5.3 million. Okay, much of its sort of like landscape is quite mountainous. It borders with Sweden, Finland, and Russia. It's on the western and northern portion of the Scandinavian peninsula, and it sits at around about 57 to 81 degrees north. So it is quite northerly in terms of its location. In terms of its physical geography, I'm going to today focus particularly on the climate, on glaciation and on waterfalls, but obviously you can look at other fluvial processes as well as the coastal geography as well, because they do have quite dramatic scenery. But I've just focusing today on the physical geography of climate, glaciation and waterfalls. So in terms of its climate, Western Norway has a marine climate. So you can do a really good sort of like comparative study, maybe with the desert climates or the rainforest climates or anything like that, or even compare it to the UK climates if you wanted to do it at Key Stage 3. They've got quite cool summers, mild winters because of the Gulf Stream. They have what's considered to be a subarctic climate. Okay, so yes, they are in the Arctic Circle, the northernmost tip, but because of the Gulf Stream, and because of the influence of the ocean, then obviously it is slightly different. Eastern Norway is sheltered by the mountains. It's got quite an inland climate, whereas the western coast of Norway is very wet. In Bergen, they have a lot of rain, a huge amount of rain. It's considered to be one of the wettest cities in Europe. In terms of its glaciers, it is one of the world's northernmost countries. It's one of Europe's most mountainous countries, and it has large areas of sort of like landscape dominated by the Scandinavian mountains, which are actually obviously very sparsely inhabited. There are over 1,600 glaciers in total, and 900 of these are in northern Norway. A lot of I think it's about 1% of mainland Norway is covered in glaciers, which doesn't seem a lot, but actually there are loads and loads and loads. And since 2000, most of the glaciers have retreated remarkably fast. And on average, they think that the frontal retreat in the northern part of Norway is 100 meters, which is incredibly quick, isn't it? This is mainly due to the high summer temperatures. And as a result, around about 98% of the Norwegian glaciers are likely to disappear by 2100 or 2100. So at the end of this century, I think that is horrific. 98% of the glaciers are going to be disappeared in the next 80 years. Really, really awful. Obviously, there is a huge butterfly effect to this. Drinking water, hydroelectric power. What are they going to do when the glaciers aren't here any longer? And this is where we can put in some critical thinking skills. I wanted to show you some visual imagery of the glacial retreat. The top image is of the Engebring Glacier, which is in central Norway, actually. And you can see the retreat just in 8 years, between 2000 and 2008. And the second image on the bottom here is of the Glacial Glacier, again in central Norway. And this is between 2003 and 2008. Fantastic imagery here, but not fantastic imagery in another way. Obviously, it's showing really, really quite dramatic retreat just over a period of 8 or even 5 years on the bottom one. So let's move on to waterfalls. So they have an eclectic mix of waterfalls in Norway. This one here is of Voringsfoss, which dips into the glaciated valley. Okay, and then this waterfall here is in the top 10 of the 30 tallest waterfalls in the world. This particular waterfall is called Vettingfossen. It has a single drop of 275 meters, and it is the tallest free-falling single waterfall in Norway. One of the things that I really found in Norway, it wasn't so much the free-falling waterfalls, it was the one that cascaded down the edges of valleys that were perhaps the most spectacular. An example here is of Steindalsfossen. And this is great because, yes, it does cascade down a valley in about 3 or 4 different drops, just showing you the top drop here. And this actual waterfall gives the most dramatic undercut as well. So it can be used to really highlight that sort of like different waterfall processes that we teach students in the classroom. I want to try and give you some scale with this particular image. So you can see obviously the house there, and there is a path that takes you in the undercut. But as you can see, it is a cascading waterfall with several drops going down. Okay, so in terms of the human geography in Norway, we have tourism, energy, sustainability, culture, population, their environmental status, as well as a little bit, I know we're geography teachers, but sometimes we might want to bring in some historical importance, particularly with all the different ports that are in Norway, and the Hanseatic era and the links to Bergen for Europe for the rest of the world. And actually Bergen is a UNESCO heritage site because of the importance of the port and the trade that was going on through Bergen, which then linked to the rest of Europe. Okay, so a little bit of information about the human side of Norway. Population, as I said, 5.3 million. The capital is Oslo. It has the 4th highest per capita income. So it is quite a wealthy country. It's number 1 on the Human Development Index. It's considered to be one of the happiest places to live, although I did see the 2021 results this year, and actually it was Finland that came in as number 1, but Norway was number 2. And obviously they rank highly in public integrity, democracy, and in terms of the better quality of life. Okay. So perhaps the most relevant and topical information about Norway is its strive for carbon neutrality. And just to give you a little bit of background to this, obviously carbon neutrality refers to achieving net zero carbon dioxide emissions. And this is mainly done by balancing the carbon emissions with its removal, either by carbon offsetting or even eliminating these emissions from society completely. It's used really, and it's very difficult at the moment to eliminate carbon completely. Obviously, they are reliant on it for much transportation, for agriculture, for different industries. But Norway is attempting to be the first country in the world to be carbon neutral. It's closely followed by Costa Rica and Iceland, actually. And if you want a little bit more information about these three sort of like forerunners in the sort of like strive for this, you could take a look at our free webinar, which does focus on this strive for carbon neutrality, looking at Costa Rica, Iceland and Norway. But in terms of sustainability, Norway really is leading the rest of the world. You know, they are way ahead of most other countries. Now, we know that sustainable development has to be underpinned by the three columns as shown as this diagram here. So economic value, environmental integrity, and the benefit to society. And according to recent data by Robico Sam, they are actually now the most sustainable country in the world. And Robico Sam did a lot of evidence and statistical sort of like gathering on this. And they considered that the reason why they are the most sustainable is, one, because of their sort of like integral use of renewable energy, but also because of their leadership in governance, their innovation, and their human capital and environmental indicators as well. And this really has promoted them right to the top of the leaderboard as such, in terms of being most sustainable. Now, sustainable energy is energy that is produced in such a way that it meets the needs of the future, and it can only sort of like do this if you take into account sort of like future generations as well. And Norway continues a long tradition of generous support to the UN environmental issues, and they do have a commitment to sort of like, you know, protecting our planet. It's a key partner with the UN, and it really does put the environment at the heart of every effort to improve the life of people across the globe. One of the main reasons that they can do this is with hydroelectric power, which accounts for 95% of the country's energy production. And they are actually looking at solar, at wind. So, you know, they really do hope that by 2025, they will be completely reliant on renewable energy. They are also sort of like being quite forward thinking in terms of fossil fuel powered cars. And they have made quite a big sort of like statement that by 2025, all vehicles in circulation must be powered by green energy. They're already one of the top countries with the most electric cars per capita, but they are going that little step further and saying, look, by 2025, which is only 4 years' time, all cars and vehicles and lorries and that on the road in Norway should be powered by green energy. That doesn't include the ones that are coming in from other countries, but that includes the ones that are in circulation within Norway itself. So in terms of hydroelectric power, Norway currently has 1,660 hydroelectric power plants, and it really is sort of like the mainstay of the Norwegian electricity. They are the 6th largest hydropower producer in the world, with a population of only 5 million. So it is really massive, really massive. Everywhere you look, there is hydroelectric power. It really is going from quite small scale sort of like power stations to the very large ones that you can see on these images here. And they are also looking at solar power as well. Being so far north, it does mean that they get huge amounts of daylight and sunshine during the summer months. They really do. And they are really trying to make this work. And the developments in technology are really helping to make this transition towards this greener future quite sort of a lot easier, as well as being more cost effective. The collection of solar energy in Norway was once sort of like regarded as quite difficult, particularly, you know, because obviously they are quite mountainous as a country, and obviously they do have, a season where it is quite dark. But now most homes in Norway are equipped with smart meters, which allow them to harvest the solar energy. All new homes have solar panels, and there was a fantastic government incentive, which basically meant that you could sort of like have a sort of like a payment program to have the solar power sort of like put on your roof, and then obviously the energy companies would buy it back off of you, and that would kind of pay for the solar panels. So it really was a fantastic incentive, which meant that people got behind the technology. Businesses in Norway also see that the future in renewables is very, very important. And in recent years, there's been a lot of startup sort of like businesses, which has helped to speed up the shift to renewables. For example, Ocean Sun. Now, Ocean Sun was actually founded by an ex-oil and gas man, and he's pioneering this new solar farm technology that floats on the surface of the ocean. And this means that, you know, these nice, thin, flexible solar panels, they're capable of withstanding the ocean. But this brilliant technology opens up huge swathes of energy producing space, can be moored close to the coast, so you don't need to exploit the land mass. And it really gives them sort of like more abundant energy and bring the cost of energy cut down. Now, obviously, we know that Norway is not squeaky clean, and we're, you know, because we're talking about oil and gas in the same sort of like thing as solar power and hydroelectric. But, you know, they are making really big grounds, and we'll look at that when we come to our critical thinking side of things. Over the last years, the stock of electric and plug-in hybrid cars in Norway has really, really increased. And actually, over the last couple of years, the government set a target of 50,000 electric cars on its road by 2017, and they did that in 2015, so they were way above. They've now got over 200,000 pure electric cars and over 400,000 hybrid cars, so the mix between the two. Really, really quite impressive. Everywhere you go in Norway, there are these plug-in sort of like areas where you can charge your car. Most homes have got them. They really have tried to make it, because one of the things that we find, my husband has an electric van, and obviously they only have a range of about 100 miles, some of these cars and vans, which is an issue in this country, because we don't have the charging points needed to do a long journey. But in Norway, they really do. They have them everywhere, you know, and that is brilliant. They really have put in the infrastructure to support the changeover. Wind power is also making strong advancements. And just look at how much is saved by replacing the gas turbines in the oil fields by wind power. It's so funny saying that in one sentence when you're talking about sustainability. But obviously we do know that Norway does have huge oil and gas fields, and they are needed, you know, they need to power them. And you can see here that sort of like using the wind power has actually reduced the amount of carbon going into the atmosphere, the same as 100,000 cars. So it is quite significant. As more and more renewables are installed, you know, it makes sort of like balancing supply and demand a little bit difficult. And the Norwegians are concerned about reliance on renewables, because the supply from wind and the sun and water, as we've already talked about the retreating glaciers, it does fluctuate. So you need backup plants to keep this power sort of like stable and constant. And they've got this new sort of system where they have put lots and lots of tunnels. It's a little bit like an anthill, actually. Lots and lots of water tunnels within the mountains, which can actually store and transfer the water. And this keeps sort of like the water at the correct speed to provide stable power to the grid, and keeps the power a little bit more, you know, stable. They also hope that as this develops a little bit more, that they can store this electricity and become the green battery of Europe. So you can see here, they're talking about doing interconnectors between Norway and the UK. And also they're talking about taking interconnectors from Norway down through Denmark, and then into sort of like Germany, Belgium, France, and some of those countries as well. So they really do have sort of like big plans in terms of not just creating enough energy from themselves, but actually having enough energy to sort of supply Europe as well. Okay, so let's move on to critical thinking. You know, the definition of critical thinking is a cognitive process where people are able to analyse, understand, evaluate, be open-minded, and to reason. So this comes into play when we're doing research, isn't it? And being able to question the information that you've got is so very important. You know, understanding when something is reliable, understanding who has written it, what evidence is there to support these claims? You know, is the evidence that I've got in front of me, is it creditable? And all of these are big critical thinking skills. We also need to make sure that students understand the difference between misinformation and disinformation. Okay, so misinformation, spreading false information without knowing it's false. And I do think that this happens a lot. And then you have disinformation, which actually is deliberately and knowing that you are spreading false information. Okay, now I think this is really, really important. And an example of sort of like misinformation could be some of the conspiracy theories behind the 5G and coronavirus, you know, because some people really thought that that was very, very true. They had read it, they thought that it was true. They then sort of like spread that information around. You know, and inoculations, things like the measles vaccine, a lot of that, people were misinformed. So it is really, really important that they have an idea of the difference between the two, you know, particularly with so much information that they've got at close hand now. So how do we apply all this into the classroom? You know, explaining to students what critical thinking means and enabling them, empowering them to use those skills within a classroom. Explain what bias is. You know, we know that we've all got some sort of bias, but, you know, start simple and then build that up. Talk about the different types of reasoning, the importance of open-mindedness. Talk about group work, allow them to do group work, including sort of like problem solving and decision making, and give students time to think and to be quiet. Really, really important, really important. And we're going to look at silent debates as a practice in a minute. So when it comes to Norway, how can we develop our critical thinking skills? Well, we've talked about how good Norway is in terms of sustainability, yet they are number 14 on the environmental index. So why are they lagging behind their European and Scandinavian neighbours in this? In terms of their energy use, they are number 2 behind Iceland, who's completely 100% reliable on renewables. Yet look at their energy consumption. It is absolutely massive per capita. Is this to do with education? Is this to do with oil and gas? I don't know. You know, maybe that is something that we could get our students to consider. And then we turn to the production of oil. They are the 15th largest oil producer in the world. They actually call it black gold because it has really made the country incredibly wealthy. You know, Norway owes much of its prosperity to oil and gas exports. It's worth more than $60 billion in 2019, and more than 250,000 people of their sort of like, you know, population are employed within that sector. So it really does rely heavily on those revenues for its public finances and its trade balance, for its employment, and actually to keep rural Norway populated. You know, black gold is the reason why Norway have got sort of like, you know, a huge sovereign wealth fund. You know, it's worth, it's staggering figures actually. It's 1.13 trillion euros. You know, they are looking to decrease the output of fossil fuels, but this is going to take time. just literally because it would have such a huge impact on their population, on how they are, on how they live their lives, and all of that sort of stuff. Okay. So just a few weeks ago, London-based CNN international news producer Ivana Kotasova, actually, she accused Norway, actually along with Canada and the UK, of preaching sustainability, but actually, you know, simultaneously cashing in on the very thing that is causing climate change, fossil fuels. Okay, it caused much discussion. It was retweeted by Greta Thunberg. And Karen, who was a big project manager looking at the oil and gas industry in Oslo, and she's very, very important. She actually agrees. She says, yeah, we are a little bit of a climate hypocrite, but it's complicated. We can't just switch off that oil tap from one day to another. And they are really driving the transformation towards a more sustainable society. And they are at the forefront. Somebody has to take a lead, but it can't just stop. It's got to be phased out. Young Norwegians are really genuinely concerned about climate change. You know, a lot of them took to the streets in the 2019 climate strike. And these could all be things that you could get your students to discuss, to look at the different viewpoints, to critically think, look at the evidence, look at who's saying the tweets, look at who's writing the articles, look at who's sort of like working for Greenpeace. You know, these are great activities that you can do. I think headline analysis in a classroom is one of the most powerful tools that you can use when you're looking at a country, you're looking at topics, you're looking at case studies. It's great to take a headline, analyze the language. Is it positive? Is it negative? Is it biased? Does it trigger an emotion? Is that emotion based on misinformation, disinformation? Who wrote the article? Were they objective? Were they independent? Has someone paid them to write the article? I was reading an article the other day on Posidonia oceanica, seagrass actually, in Mallorca, and they were talking about whether or not yachts in the Mediterranean were doing damage to the seagrass. And it was saying, no, they didn't. It was very minimal. But the journalist that wrote that article was paid to write the article by the Yachting Association. So therefore, that article was never going to be objective. It was never going to be independent. It seemed that it was, but it really wasn't. And that is critical thinking skills. And that's what we want our students to do. Another thing that we could do is silent debates. We say, didn't we, a picture paints 1,000 words. And silent debates are just great, especially when there are emotive feelings and arguments in the room, and also views and opinions which might spark controversy. Writing and silence help students explore a topic or a concept in depth. It engages everybody, particularly those who are less involved or want to be less involved in verbal discussions. There's no competition to get their voice heard. You know, we want to engage the students, and using an image, maybe like this one on the bottom, or maybe the combination of the wind farms alongside the oil drilling platform here, you know, that could be a fantastic trigger. If you want some information on silent debates, please do let me know. I can send you a lesson plan which goes around silent debates. I love silent debates. I think the gallery walk that happens after a silent debate is powerful and just really can impact not just the quietest students, but also the ones that are usually quite opinionated. It allows them to reflect. It allows them to discuss. And they really are a fantastic tool in the classroom. Stephen Hawking once said, didn't he, quiet people have the loudest minds. So therefore, I do believe that silent discussion is actually probably one of the noisiest activities that you can do in a classroom. So just some closing thoughts on what we have looked at today. We've looked at the importance of case studies and critical thinking in the classroom. We've looked at some ideas for their effective implementation and integration. We've looked at the importance of the choice of a case study. Make sure you enjoy teaching it. It's really, really important. I hope that I've given you some information on Norway as a case study, and particularly some focus on sustainability, renewable energy, and that kind of thing. Some extended knowledge on sustainability and making connections, and then some opportunities for critical thinking within your classroom. If you do want to get in contact with me, please do. You can either get hold of me through the Discover the World Education website. Please do take a look at the Critical Thinkers website. We also have a Facebook group on both Geography Teacher Zone with Discover the World and the Critical Thinkers community through ourselves. Please enjoy the summer. This is my last webinar of this particular academic year. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for joining with me this afternoon. I hope you're going to enjoy the football. Stay safe, be kind to each other and yourself, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you very much.